Howdy everyone. So who's ready for chapter 10 of Trail of the Gods, book 4 of the Morcyth Saga? For those of you who haven't already, please subscribe. It'd be much appreciated. Just click that little button on the bottom right corner and excuse me, and like the video if you like it, and comment please. I'm always interested to hear what people have to say about it. Anyway, here's chapter 10. The following morning found James back in the workshop right after breakfast, fully rested. True to his word, Illan had taken the training session to the other side of the house, as far away from his window as possible. For the first time in days, James was able to sleep himself out. Before him on the workbench were two empty crystals. He planned to use one for his warning system, and the other as a possible defensive measure against anyone other than himself touching the box. The box in question, for those of you who may be just joining us, is an iron box, has 5 crystals on it, in which he's going to hide the fires, which is the focal point for the evil god Dmon-Li. Dmon-Li's priests are hunting for this, and as soon as he gets it hidden, he might be safe from them for a while anyway. He infused them with the leeching spell and took them out to the forest until tomorrow, in order to have them somewhat charged before he began infusing them with the desired spells which he still needed to figure out. The warning system would be fairly easy. Reaching down to the bag of crystals, he pulled out 2 more. One would be the transmitter and the other a receiver. The transmitter crystal would be set near the box at its final destination. It would sit dormant. Hang on 1 second. It would sit dormant until such time that the box was disturbed. Then it would send a burst of power to the receiver crystal. When the burst of power entered the receiver crystal, he would have it set up where a dormant spell within the receiver crystal would activate. The crystal would then glow a brilliant red, alerting him that the fire had been disturbed. Whether he would be able to do anything about it at the time remained unclear, but at least he would know something was going on. He worked on figuring out the right spells. By lunchtime, they had been pretty much finalized. They just needed testing. He had just imbued the crystals with the spells when someone knocked at the workshop door. "Come in," he hollered. Ezra entered with a plate of sandwiches and a mug of ale. "Thought you might be busy, and I didn't want you missing any more meals," she explained as she put the food before him on the workbench. "Thank you," he said. Giving him a brief nod and smile, she left the workshop and shut the door behind her. Taking a sandwich in one hand, he let each of the crystals leach some power from him until they emitted a very soft red glow. Canceling the leech spells, he then set about testing his theory. The receiver crystal had been imbued with a certain signature that the transmitter would home in on when it sent out its burst of power. When the actual crystal was placed within the box's final resting place, he would fine-tune it a little bit more so the power would flow in pretty much the correct direction. Picking up the receiver crystal, he took it into the house and placed it within the money chest sitting in his room. Shutting the lid, he returned to the workshop. There, he activated the transmitter crystal and felt a brief tingle as it sent most of the power it contained to the receiver crystal. It still held a faint glow. He had placed a limit on how much could be expelled by the crystal. Since he wouldn't have access to the box once it was hidden, he didn't want to run the risk of any crystal becoming completely depleted and cracking. Leaving the workshop, he headed back to his room and opened the lid. The receiver crystal now glowed. He canceled the spell on the crystal and the glow disappeared. Smiling with great satisfaction, he took the crystal and left the room. Back in the kitchen, he asked Ezra where Miko was, and she told him he was out back with Roland. "Thanks," he said before heading out the back door. The unmistakable sound of wood being chopped reached him as he stepped outside. He saw them in the area Roland used for splitting logs. Roland set a round section of log in front of Miko, who then took the maul-like tool they used in these parts for splitting logs and struck it with all his might, sinking the wedge deep within the wood. The tool had a long handle, just as a regular axe, but the head was fashioned differently. On one side was a 6-inch piece of wedge-shaped metal. The other had a flat block of metal that could be used as a sledgehammer. Michael lifted the log splitter with the piece of wood still attached and then slammed it back down on the stump as hard as he could. When the wood impacted the stump, the tool sank deeper into the wood, splitting it apart. Roland took the pieces and tossed them to a large pile of already split wood. He then placed another round section of log on the stump as Miko readied to again swing the log splitter. So, interesting note here, when I wrote this, I had not split wood at all by that time. I hadn't done any bit of it. Now, though, I've split cords and cords and cords of it. Anyway, the maul that I described there basically is the same one I'm using now. So, yeah, I just found that interesting because it's got the wedge shape. It goes in there, and then it's got the flat shape on the end. So if it gets stuck, you take your sledgehammer and hit the top, and it pushes it down, and then you split it. It splits. Michael lifted the log splitter with the piece of wood still attached, and then slammed it back down the stump as hard as he could. Okay, that sounds good, but if you've ever tried that, man, that's hard. I mean, you see it in movies, but they generally have these little bitty logs like this. Around here, I'm doing stuff like 1.5 foot across, right? So you're basically just trying to wedge it down into it to split off sections, and each of those weighs like 50, 60 pounds, right? So if your maul hits it and it's stuck, there is no way, at least not for me, Arnold Schwarzenegger maybe, could I pull that whole thing up and smash it? There's just no way. So oh well. Excuse me, he said as he approached. Michael swung and embedded the wedge side deep within the wood. Before lifting the wood to finish splitting it, he glanced over to James and asked, "Care to lend a hand?" "No, but I could use your help." He again lifted the wood and slammed it down on the stump, which almost completely split it. Taking the wood in his hands, he pried the two sections apart and tossed the smaller one over to the wood pile before setting the larger piece back on the stump. Now, I've done that too. Sometimes when you split a wood, it's not quite apart, and sometimes you have to actually physically pull them apart. I mean, in movies, one hit split. I rarely do that. Of course, I'm not doing logs this big either, so. "How?" he asked as he struck the wood again, this time splitting the piece in two with one blow. Okay, there is nothing more satisfactory than taking your maul, hitting that piece of wood, and having it split the first time. There's just no satisfaction better than that. I'll tell you that right now. And I found that red cedar, of the ones around here, red cedar splits the best. They have the best one split. The worst would have to be hang on, I got it. That's right. Pecan. Wham, wham, wham. I mean, and it's making like little bitty dents. There have been times when I've had to take a chisel wedge, and go wham, and just drive it in there and split it. Crazy. I know. Bodark is just as bad. "If you can spare him, Roland, I need him to ride into town." "Sure," Roland replied as he came and took the log splitter from Miko. "Thanks for the help." "No problem," Michael said as he followed James to the stables. "This won't take long," he assured him. "What I want you to do is ride into town, or maybe even past it." Holding up the receiver crystal, he said, "I'm going to try and have this crystal light up from a distance. As you ride, hold this in your hand. When you see light coming from within it, turn around and head back." Seeing the doubt in his eyes as he glanced to the crystal, he added, "It won't hurt you. You won't feel anything." "What do you want to do this for?" he asked as he hesitantly took the crystal. James almost laughed at the way he held it. You'd think he had a deadly snake or something in his hand. "Just an experiment is all," he explained. As much as he liked and trusted Miko, there were just some things he didn't need to know. "Okay," he said. "When do you want me to leave?" "Right now, if you wouldn't mind." "Sure. Let me get washed and I'll saddle my horse." "Thanks, I appreciate it. I plan on letting you ride for an hour or so before setting the signal to have the crystal glow. I want to see how well it does over a distance." He watched a moment while Michael walked to the wash basin out by the kitchen to clean up before heading back to the workshop. Now, for the defense of the fire. He mulled it over for several minutes before he heard Michael's horse racing down the lane. Glancing out the window, he saw him turning out of the lane and heading into town. Returning to his work, he contemplated the best types of defensive spells he could put in the crystal. The spells couldn't be such that they would pose a risk to the box or the fire. They needed to be more selective, but powerful enough to thwart any attempt to steal it. Of course, The spell should also be tailored to take advantage of the environment wherein the fire would be hidden. Incorporating the strengths of the area could only aid in its defense. Throughout the rest of the day, he came up with several ideas and ended up scrapping each in turn. Nothing seemed to work the way he planned. He took a short break for dinner, but then was right back to work afterwards. When the light began to fade, Ezra came out and placed a couple candles in his workshop to give him light to work by. So engrossed was he in what he was doing that he barely even realized she placed them there until long after she had left. Finally, exhausted and mentally fatigued, he looked at the defensive crystals sitting before him. All the spells he thought he needed were infused with them. All it would take now was to power the crystal and then finally activate the dormant spells within once the fire was properly hidden. Getting up from his workbench, he stressed and began to head to his room where he tended to crash hard. Almost to the door to the kitchen, he abruptly stopped as a thought suddenly occurred to him. Miko! I forgot all about him. It must be well over 5 hours since he had sent him off to check on the receiver crystal. Rushing back to the workshop, he found the crystal and activated it. He felt a short tingle as it sent a signal. Feelings of guilt filled him as he left the workshop and headed for his room. Poor Miko, wonder how far he'd gotten. The town of Osgrin had long since disappeared behind him when the crystal began emitting the light James had told him about. Finally, bringing the horse to a stop, he paused as he looked at the crystal. A soft reddish glow came from deep within. How did he do that? Putting the glowing crystal in his pack, he turned his horse around and headed back to Osgrin. An hour, indeed. Been more like 5, maybe more. Miko was starving and figured James would have to wait a little bit longer for his return. He planned on finding an inn somewhere in Osgrin where he could have a bite to eat before heading back. If he didn't think James would want to know as soon as possible about his crystal, he would get a room and head out in the morning. Alright, so upon reading this before, there's a reason why he's where he is, and you'll hear about it in a minute. But I got to thinking. 1 second, my throat's getting dry. Okay. Put yourself in Michael's stage, right? He's writing. In his mind, he says, "Okay, an hour, right?" James said an hour, just to see if this would work. So basically, the hour came and went, and he kept going. 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. There's a gnat flying around. Anyway, at what point, how far would Michael have, at what point would you have continued knowing that the crystal in your hand may or may not work? Now, 1 hour is supposed to go off, and it didn't. How much farther would you keep going? Would you just keep going forever? Apparently that's what Miko did. So, what do you think? Should he have turned around before it lit? Because it was like 5, I don't know. It was already dark, right? So, and he left sometime after lunch. So, how far did he go, really? And would he have continued knowing that the crystal, that there was a chance the crystal might never glow? And James said 1 hour. Anyway, let's continue on, shall we? Putting the glowing crystal in his pack, he turned his horse around and headed back to Osgrin. An hour, indeed. Been more like 5 or 6. Michael was starving. Okay, sorry. Rereading it. The lights of Osgrin appeared ahead of him, and when he entered the outskirts, came to a 2-story building bearing a sign depicting a pig on a spit roasting over a fire. A wonderfully delicious aroma filled the air. Roasted pork was what it smelled like. Stopping in front, he secured his horse to one of the rails and made his way through to the front door. The place was packed, and the only table left to him sat all the way in the back. It was a small table, barely large enough for one person. He signaled a serving girl on his way over, and she arrived shortly after he took his seat. "Welcome to the Cooked Hog," she greeted, a warm smile upon her lips. "My name's Celia. Is there anything I can get for you?" "I like some of whatever that is that smells so good," he replied, "and a mug of ale too, please." "That would be our specialty, roast pig," she explained. "It's only half a silver and comes with some vegetables as well as a half loaf of bread." "Perfect," he said as he handed over the coins. Taking the money, she said, "Back in a moment." He sat back and looked over the patrons as he waited for his meal. Sitting around the next table to him were 5 men, mercenaries by the looks of them. Scattered throughout the common room were others, perhaps 10 in all, most likely guards from some caravan stopped in Osgren for the night. Celia emerged from the kitchen a minute later, bringing his meal. She set a large plate with sizzling slices of roast pork before him. Arrayed around the edges of the plate were several of the favorite local tubbers everyone seemed to like. On the table next to it, she placed half a loaf of bread and his mug of ale. Is there anything else you require? Taking out his knife and using the fork which had been supplied, he cut off a large slice. Shaking his head, he stuffed it in his mouth as he turned and walked away. The juice ran down his chin and he wiped it off with his arm. Taking the bread, he was pleasantly surprised to find it still warm. He tore off a chunk and dipped it in the juices on the plate. He had never done that before. James did it one time. Ever since, he'd rarely eaten just plain bread. I mean, come on. How good is sopping up juice, or gravy with bread? Oh, man. Not here. Oh, from the table of mercenaries next to him, he heard something that made his blood run cold. One of them just spoke in the Empire's language before the mercenary sitting next to him jabbed him in the ribs. Not here, the other man whispered. Use only their tongue. Sorry, the first man replied. Forgot. Michael glanced over to them while trying to appear like he wasn't. Now that he paid closer attention, he could tell they were not from this area. The slight darkening of the skin and their facial characteristics all said they were from the Empire. They were not as prominent in these men as in others he had seen while in the Empire, and would most likely not be noticed with just a cursory look. But after what he had gone through, he was not likely to ever mistake them again. James. They must be here after James. He continued eating, more slowly this time, and tried to listen to their conversations. Most of what they said was barely audible, and he could only make out fragments. Just to the north of here. We'll kill him. That's what... Soon, maybe tomorrow, not sure. Get it done and return home where... They're here to kill James. He wolfed down the rest of his meal quickly and took the bread with him to eat on the road. Getting up from the table, he tried not to make eye contact with the men as he moved past them toward the door. A hand grabbed his arm and he almost pulled out his sword before realizing it was Celia. She looked expectantly at him as she asked, Wouldn't you like to stay around a little longer? What? He asked, confused. I get off in an hour, she explained, giving him a look that stirred his blood. We could go somewhere if you like. Sorry, he said as he removed her hand from his arm, but I really have to be going. Turning back to the door, he left a very disappointed Celia behind as he exited the cooked hog. Untying his horse, he quickly mounted and galloped out of Osgren. He had to return to the ranch and warn James. Okay, well, there's poor Michael, right? He's basically got the emotional capacity of a pre-adolescent in the hormone-driven body of a man. I don't think I really dealt with that, but that is what Michael's going through right now. Of course, I guess all the women out there would say that that describes most men under 30. Okay. 3.5 hours later, the lane leading to the ranch appeared before him. In the moonlight, he was able to make out the recently erected guard shack next to where the lane began. As he approached, a shadow detached itself from within the guard shack, and a lantern shutter was open, bathing him in light. Miko! He heard Uther's voice exclaim as the lantern's light turned away from him. Didn't think you'd be returning till morning. We've got trouble, he told him, and then gave him a brief rundown of what he overheard back in Osgren. You better keep extra alert. I will, thanks, he told him. Kicking his horse, he raced down the lane to the house. Not bothering to tie his horse, he jumped down and rushed inside and slammed open James's bedroom door. Startled awake, James woke to find Michael framed in the doorway. Figuring him to be mad about having him ride for hours, he began to say, Michael, glad you're back. Sorry about interrupting him, Michael said. James, there are men from the Empire in Osgren. Sitting up, all thoughts of having forgotten Michael vanished. What? He exclaimed. When? Roland came to the door behind Michael and asked, What's going on? Michael says there are men from the Empire down in Osgren. Are you sure? Roland asked. Absolutely, he replied. After the time I've spent around them, I can recognize their speech. About this time, Illan and the others showed up with their weapons. Uther came and told us we're about to be attacked. Everyone quiet, James shouted. All talking ceased as they turned their attention to him. Now, he said to Michael, tell us what happened. Michael ran through the whole story, trying not to leave out even the most insignificant detail. When he was done, he glanced from one face to another and then settled on James. What are we going to do? Illan? James asked, looking to the veteran soldier. Since we know they're coming, we can be prepared. He said, that's half the battle. To Jorah, he said, wake up the new recruits and send them out into the forest. Tell them what's going on and to keep their eyes open. After that, join Uther out by the road. One of you by the shack and the other a little ways away, so if they come down the road, they won't see both of you. Right, he said as he bolted down the hallway to the front door. Turning to Michael, he asked, you said there were 10? There were 5 at the table next to me, he explained. I saw another 5 scattered throughout the inn. So, 10 then, he said. With the element of surprise gone, we should be able to take them on with no trouble. To Jerome, he said, take a horse into town. If you don't find them on the road, then head on into Osgrin and see if you can locate them. They probably haven't left Osgrin and with any luck, they'll stay the night there and not head out till morning. They were at the Cooked Hog, Michael said. They may be staying the night there. Thanks, he said as he hurried out to the stable to get his horse. What should the rest of us do, Roland asked. Nothing much else to do until we know where they are, he said. Go back to bed. How can I sleep knowing we could be attacked at any moment? Giving him an exasperated look, Illan turned to James and said, you stay here, get some sleep if you can. You too, Miko. You're dead on your feet. You'll be no use in a fight if you're too tired. What about you? James asked. I'll be outside, keeping an eye on things, he said. Don't worry. We'll know if something's about to happen before it does. If you say so, Michael said, as he went to try to get some sleep. Illan hurried to get his armor on and then went outside where James heard him barking orders to those patrolling the woods. Returning to his bed, he lay there thinking about the upcoming attack. At least they knew what was going to happen first this time. Maybe it wasn't just chance that had him forgetting about Miko. Perhaps another had taken a hand in it? His mind finally calmed down enough so he could fall back to sleep. He woke early the next morning and sprang out of bed. Leaving his room, he found out that nothing out of the ordinary had happened during the night. Jerome hadn't returned, and that had Illan worried. Should we send someone after him? He asked Illan when he learned that Jerome had yet to return. Can't afford to, he said. Should they launch an attack, we'll need everyone we have. You're right, of course, admitted James. I'm going to start rotating them in for some rest and food, Illan explained as he headed out to the woods and the new recruits on patrol. Worry for Jerome still nagged at him, so he went out to his workshop where he got his mirror. Laying it out in front of him on his workbench, he concentrated on Jerome. As the image began to coalesce, he saw him riding hard along a road. Enlarging the view, he was still unable to determine exactly where he was. Most likely on his way back, he assumed. Putting the mirror away, he left the workshop and saw Jace coming in from the forest. Moving to intercept him, he asked, is Illan still out there? Jace looked up, brown eyes widening at being addressed by him. Pushing aside the lock of hair that's forever curling down in front of his face, he replied, I think so. Thanks, he said, and then headed into the forest. He found Illan farther in where he spoke with Aaron. When he saw James coming, he said one last thing to Aaron before she headed off into the forest. He then turned and walked toward James. Jerome's on the road, riding hard, James informed him. Couldn't determine exactly where. As Illan came abreast of him, James turned and walked with him out of the forest. I'm thinking he's coming back here to give us word about the mercenaries. Most likely, Illan agreed. We'll know soon enough. When he returns, we'll have a better idea of what's going on, and then we'll know what we're going to need to do. As they left the forest, Ezra stood by the kitchen door. When she saw them, she signaled that breakfast was ready. James gave her a nod and headed in that direction. I'll be along in a few minutes, Illan told him. I still need to find Moyle, and then I'll join you. All right, James said. Illan angled away from him to proceed around the house as they drew near. The sound of hammering could be heard from the construction site as the builders resumed working on the house. He wondered if it was a good idea to have them there with what may be coming their way. Perhaps it was better to give the appearance of normalcy so as not to arouse the attacker's suspicion. Entering the kitchen, he found Jace, Ori, and Devon seated at the table. First time any of the recruits had sat there. They were waiting for him. Ezra must have already instructed them in the proper etiquette when eating at the master's table. Once he was seated and had begun to spoon eggs on his plate, they set in grabbing serving bowls and platters. All right, I have a problem with that. As a reader, I have a problem with that. Because earlier I said that the whole waiting for James thing in the morning didn't matter. But this is the first time the recruits were there, so Ezra knew he was up. Ezra knew he was coming to the table. So I believe they waited for him so she could instill in them proper respect for the master of the house. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, back to the story. See anything? He asked after swallowing his first bite. Nothing, replied Devon. What's going on? Ori asked. Glancing at him, James replied, I've made some enemies, and we've gotten word some may be on their way. That's dumb, Jace exclaimed. Why is that dumb? James asked. Trying to kill a mage, I mean, he said. One spell from you, and they're toast. The other recruits nodded agreement. Toast. Would they have toast? Would they have toast in medieval times? See, that's the things that as an author I think about, because we make toast in a toaster. But you know, when ovens first started, they did make toasters. So, did they toast bread back then? And would they use that terminology? I'm gonna leave it. Americans are reading it. It's not as easy as that, he explained. Just then the door opened and Illan walked in. Did you find him? Illan took a seat, and while he filled his plate, I replied, yes, I did. Everyone's accounted for. He glanced around the table, and when he didn't see Miko, asked, is he still sleeping? He was up pretty late last night. Just then, they heard the sound of a horse racing down the lane toward the house. Jerome! He exclaimed as he came to his feet and practically ran through the front room to the door. He hurried outside as Jerome brought his horse to a stop. Dismounting, Jerome came over to him and said, I found them. Where? Illan asked from the doorway before James could get the words out. They spent the night in Osgren and headed out this morning, he explained. It didn't seem that they were in all that much of a hurry, though. When I saw they were taking the road to Trindle, I came back here as fast as I could. How many were there? James motioned for him to come inside as he answered. 21. The party that left Osgren had 18 men at arms, as well as 2 wagons. Couldn't tell what was in the wagons, but one was being driven by a single man, the other had a man and a woman. A woman? Illan asked as they returned to the kitchen where they took their seats. Yeah, Jerome replied as he began helping himself to the food. She didn't have the look of a fighter. Maybe a mage? James asked. Judging, Jerome said, maybe. I want you and young Devon here to go back and find them, Illan told Jerome. If anything develops that we need to know about, send Devon back. Devon got an excited look in his eye when he heard that he would be going with Jerome on a mission. Turning to James, Illan continued. I think we should stand everyone down, seeing as how an attack is not imminent. I leave that to your judgment. And he should too, right, Illan? I mean, come on, right? The rest of the meal went fairly quickly. Jerome hurried and ate so he could return to find them. As soon as Devon was done, Illan had him go to the stable and get 2 horses saddled and ready for when Jerome finished eating. After Devon left, James said to Jerome, be careful. I will, he assured him. They've probably not come too far along by now. The wagons are going to slow them down. They'll probably reach Trindle sometime before nightfall. Scooping up the last of his food from his plate, he stood and made to leave. Good luck, Illan said. Thanks, he replied, and then went outside to where Devon sat on his horse, waiting for him. Once mounted, they quickly rode down the lane to the road where they broke into a gallop as they headed toward the advancing party. And that ends chapter 10. Things are getting exciting, aren't they? So, I know I stop periodically and talk about things and ruminate about things. Do you guys like that? Or should I save all of that for the end and then you can not listen to it if you want to? I like talking about things as it happens. But if the consensus is I should wait, then I can wait. Anyway, that's chapter 10. It's getting exciting. Illan. Still, at this point, I had no real plan for Illan other than what he's doing now. What happens in book 6? It's book 6, I think. Yeah, book 6. That just came spur of the moment when I was writing book 6. Anyway, I love Illan, and we'll see more of him in later books. Anyway, subscribe if you haven't already, and like, comment, all that good stuff. Everything helps me, and I appreciate you guys listening to me. I think, based on the comments, there's at least 5 of you guys caught up and listening to each one of these I do. If only that 5 could turn to 500, wouldn't that be wonderful? Anyway, y'all take care, and we'll get them as we do. Later.